Hi, I wanted to give you an update of what is to come with the channel, and I'm also going to give you some tips for playing solo role-playing games. These are going to be general tips. I'm not going to get too technical, although there are some technical details. Perhaps in December, I would like to bring out another video mentioning some tools that I use when running solo role-playing games. Well, let's get started first with the update. I'm going to continue with my review of Arcanum. If you haven't seen my review of Arcanum, the 30th anniversary edition, I highly recommend that you check it out. I'm going to put the link in the description below. It's an old school style role-playing game that I think it's considerably different when compared to other old school role-playing games. It still has that D20 feel to it, but there are several differences. I also want to bring out a review. Let's see if I can get the time of a war game, specifically an introduction to a very cool skirmish game. It's a somewhat casual war game. That's the appeal of it, and it's a very well-known intellectual property. I'm also going to be featuring a review that will probably please a lot of Lovecraft fans out there. It's going to feature an upcoming book that is surely going to be the treasure of the serious Lovecraft collector. And when it comes to some other additional or miscellaneous stuff, let's see if before November ends or perhaps early December, I'm going to be bringing out a video where I'm talking about some supplements and settings that you can use to modify the Pathfinder First Edition experience. I would also like to apologize because some of my videos, that is where I appear, moving about, showing my face, um, I don't know what exactly is happening, but when I shoot the video, it runs perfectly on my computer. But once I upload it to YouTube, the video, that is the moving images, get a bit choppy. This choppiness happens somewhat randomly, and it lasts like about a minute or two. But the audio works fine. Maybe some of you have noticed that in some of my blog type of videos that I sometimes bring out, like this one. And so until I figure out what is going on, some of my videos may end up a bit choppy. That is, in the videos where I appear in person. When it comes to my reviews, they are not affected because the audio is not affected, and because I use static images that sometimes fade in and out, there is no negative effect on those videos. Okay, I think that's all when it comes to the update. I've been having a somewhat difficult time to organize myself because of the whole virus madness that is going on in the world. Some things have been delayed. For example, in the case of Arcanum, that the physical book should have arrived about like 3 months ago. So I just received it recently. I'm also waiting for another review copy featuring the Forbidden Lands campaign of the Forbidden Lands. Hopefully it will arrive this year. Hopefully it will arrive. Sometimes things get lost in the mail. I'm also waiting for a terrain, sort of like a map with some terrain pieces that you can use in role-playing games, but also in war games and skirmish games. So I hope I get those packages soon enough to review them. Well, let's move on to the solo role-playing game tips. Throughout the years, I've noticed that some people find certain common obstacles when it comes to running a solo RPG. So I plan to take on those particular obstacles, while at the same time giving you some tips and advice on how to make your solo sessions a bit more smooth. The first thing I want to talk about is the driving force, the motivation, the fuel behind your intention to run a solo role-playing game. I've mentioned this in some other solo related videos. I'm going to put a link to my solo playlist in the description below where I talk about different videos, and I'm also going to put a link to my solo campaign of From the Ashes. If you haven't seen that campaign and you want an example on how to run a solo role-playing game, specifically with you acting as a game master, I recommend that you check out those links. So the motivation. I think that's something that will greatly improve your motivation or your drive to run a solo role-playing game, is to find a way to immortalize, to put it in a way, immortalize your sessions. So when I first started to play solo role-playing games several years back, I immediately took like a very disorganized even records or journals of my adventures. If someone that didn't see the solo session, didn't know anything about it, tries to read or go through the pages of those records or journals, they will make no sense of them at all. It's quite disorganized. I just have some notes, some ideas, and key events that happened during the adventure, but just by taking a look at them, I immediately resurrect or revive some of the emotions and feelings that I experienced during those solo sessions. So I would highly recommend that you keep a detailed record or account of your different RPG sessions. And if you want to share them with others, I would also recommend that you keep a blog or perhaps make videos like I do with my solo campaign of From the Ashes. I think it reinforces that fictional reality that I've mentioned in other videos. And I also highly recommend again that you consider that you approach solo role-playing games as a separate experience from your traditional role-playing game experience. That is, you do not play solo RPGs to experience what you would feel or live in a group environment. You do it because you get a certain fulfillment of it, or you, like I mentioned in other videos, maybe you have role-playing games that your group doesn't want to play and you want to play them. That may be the only way possible for you. You could also look for games online, but like I mentioned in other videos, there could be some reasons as to why you may not like that. You want things to be a bit more physical. And sometimes, even if you look online, not everyone wants to play specific role-playing games. So you definitely need to boost or empower that drive for you to play solo RPGs. And I think that keeping some sort of record, perhaps a sort of diary or videos or blog posts or anything, is going to motivate you to play solo RPGs. Maybe you want to show them to other people, or you just want to read them for yourself and remember those moments that you experienced while playing a solo RPG. Now, let's move to more technical details when it comes to running solo RPGs. There is an apparent or seemingly major obstacle when it comes to time. When you are playing a role-playing game with your group, everything flows a bit faster in some regards. You could say that there are some ways in which the group environment lags a bit or takes a bit more time when it comes to certain aspects of the campaign, but in general, when the group starts to play, when everything is going smoothly, working like clockwork, so to speak, things generally proceed faster. And why? Because you have 4 or 5 people writing down anything related to the campaign. So the game master is keeping notes of what is going on. The different players are writing down things in their sheets about the equipment that they have purchased, the spells that they are researching, anything important related to the campaign that is clues. So this all happens at the same time. But when you are playing a solo role playing game, you have to do everything on separate steps. That is, let's say that normally when the player characters get to a city or town, they take between 5 to 10 minutes to write down things that they are selling, that they are buying, some clues that they obtained while talking to non-player characters, different spells that they are researching, etc. But when you are just a single player participating as both the game master and the players, let's say that each player usually takes like 5 minutes writing down things, because you're going to be doing that, um, taking care of a single sheet and then moving on to the next character sheet and then moving on to the next character sheet. If you're using several members in the same party, it's going to take you like 20 minutes perhaps, and that is without counting your duties as a game master. So add perhaps 5 or 10 more minutes, it gets a bit tedious. Now, I said that this was apparently this apparently took longer, but when you take a look at the bigger picture, it may not be so, because for example, when you want to gather with your group, you need to make sure that the schedules are just organized in the right way so that everyone can meet up to play at a certain day. Sometimes you need to look for a confirmation that they will be able to uh, arrive to play. Maybe you need to send some emails, maybe you need to call them, send them a text message. That also takes a bit of time. Sometimes emergencies happen, sometimes you have to shift the game day to another day. So many things could happen for the group to handle their schedules, accommodate their different duties, so that they can play at a particular day at a particular hour. And that's also part of the whole equation. How many hours a week can you play? So all of that also takes a bit of time, a bit of planning. But when it comes to a solo role-playing game, because you're just the only player, it's a bit easier for you to organize things. You only have to take into account your own schedule, your own activities. So in a way, I think it's somewhat the same thing, and perhaps it's a bit faster when you play a role-playing game as a solo gamer. But there are things to speed things up, of course. My first recommendation is that whenever possible, you only play your games with a single player character. At most two, but I definitely recommend a single player character. That way you do not have to handle 4 character sheets. It's not mandatory, but only if you enjoy keeping bookkeeping of all of these different sheets, then you will be playing with 4 or perhaps 5 player characters. But if you want a more smooth and easier way to play your solo RPGs, I would highly recommend that you use only a single player character. Some systems are much better for this, of course. For example, Savage Worlds and any game featuring the 2D20 system, the player characters are quite capable and powerful in those role-playing games. So it's going to be a bit easier for you to have these hyper competent characters being able to take on different enemies, different situations. They are quite knowledgeable in this and that. A good example of these sorts of heroes or protagonists are those that appear, of course, in the stories of Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft. Very different literary styles, but for example, in the case of Robert E. Howard, you have Conan the Barbarian, Solomon Kane. They are both very good when it comes to fighting, but they also know a lot of stuff. That's something funny about those couple of characters. Even though they have this rejection or feel this repulsion or superstitious fear when it comes to anything supernatural, anything sorcerous, both Conan the Barbarian or Conan and Solomon Kane, they are actually quite knowledgeable when it comes to demons and ancient civilizations. So that's quite puzzling. It's somewhat of a paradox. If you haven't seen my videos where I talk about Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, I'm going to put the links in the description below. You may find them interesting. In the case of H.P. Lovecraft, many of his characters are these individuals that are not very capable when it comes to physical tasks, and intellectually speaking, they are more knowledgeable than the average person, but they are still not experts in their fields most of the time. Sometimes they are well equipped to get a general sense of the situation, but when it comes to things related to the occult, many different obscure cultural details, only very specific Lovecraftian characters can make sense of the entire thing, and because they are confronting very eldritch, very alien situations, most of the time they end up dead or insane. But they are also a good example. There are some solitary H.P. Lovecraft characters that survive the entire ordeal or go through interesting transformations. So both stories of H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard are great if you want to use an example of the solitary hero. Or at the very least, sometimes it could be the anti-hero as well. Let's call it the quintessential solitary protagonist. So using those as examples, that's going to motivate you to play a single player character in your solo RPG sessions. Like I said, some systems make it a bit easier, but by using some tweaks and optional rule sets or supplements like the solo heroes, Blackstream solo heroes for any D20 system, I'm going to put a link in the description below to that free document. You can modify different D20 systems so that a single player character feels like a one-man party, just like Conan the Barbarian or Solomon Kane. And there are some games that have some optional things even within the core system, like for example Pathfinder First Edition. If you use different optional rules and some other books, you can make a character that is quite powerful, almost like a demigod. Perhaps not at the start, but he becomes increasingly powerful. Super heroic, that's a better way to put it. The character becomes super heroic. So there are many different ways to modify things. And for example, in the case of Savage Worlds, there is an optional rule that appears in the most recent edition of Beasts and Barbarians. I don't remember if it's in the player's handbook or in the Game Master's book. I think it's in the Game Master's book of Beasts and Barbarians. You have a few tweaks so that you can play an entire campaign with a single player character or with a couple of player characters by making them quite powerful at the very start. So it makes sense both mechanically and thematically. That is, there are many rule sets or ways for you to modify things so that you play a single player character. And thematically speaking, like I said, you see those characters all the time in fiction, and in real life there are also some people that accomplish some really amazing things on their own. Perhaps some of you watching this video have been you have been in many different dangerous situations when it was just you all by your lonesome and you managed to overcome different things. So it's the same thing. You can still have a solitary hero taking on anything that the campaign throws at them. Now, going further into technical details, I think it's a must-have, in my personal opinion, to have a computer when you are playing a solo RPG. Of course, I know that some of you are more traditional when it comes to playing role-playing games. Some of you play RPGs without using any sort of electronic media or tools. But when I think back to my teenage years, when I first started to play really formal or organized campaigns in RPGs, I always, that is, as a dedicated game master or dungeon master, I always carried this duffel bag filled with books and charts and notebooks and miniatures and dice, and I was basically carrying it around whenever I was invited to a friend's house. And then I spread all the books all over the table. It's quite amazing how I managed to run some campaigns while keeping track of all of those things and having all of those different splat books and adventure modules open at the table at the same time. But now, technology makes things so much easier. You can have your computer, your laptop, and you could have several PDFs open at the same time. And if you also use your smartphone or your tablet, you can also have some PDFs open in those devices. So it's very easy for you to have several reference books at the same time, and because of the Control F function, you can search for any term. It just takes you a few seconds to get straight to the rule that you are searching for. In most cases, you can also print your PDFs so you can have some pages that you know that you will be constantly referencing during the campaign. And so technology really does make things easier when you run a role-playing game. And for example, let's talk about table space. Depending on the system that you are running, sometimes you need miniatures and some space to run different encounters in a sort of war game style. But other times you don't have too much space. So it's a good idea to, for example, have one of those map programs open. There's several programs that you can use to map your progress in an adventure and a campaign, and you can use those programs to move your virtual token or miniature around. So it makes things quite easy. You're running everything on the screen of your computer. And for example, in my case, when I run From the Ashes as a solitary RPG, because From the Ashes is mostly a white box experience, it's very simple, old school D&D. I have this notebook with a grid that is your typical notebook with squares, with little squares. And I use a pencil and I write C for Corvus in the maps that I make. And the enemies, depending on the enemy, for example, the recent encounter with the slug, the giant slug, I just write S. So whenever I'm moving the Corvus or the slug around in the battle map, I just erase the S or the C and just write it where they are moving to or the new space that they are occupying. Very easy. And of course, if you're running, let's say you're playing Pathfinder and you like using miniatures, well, you just need to have a table to your side so you can handle those combat encounters where you need to know about positioning because of different area of effect, attacks and bonuses, etc. So, but definitely if you don't want to, if you consider it too much of a hassle to be moving around different maps and miniatures and all of that and terrain, it's much better to have this any software open on your laptop or your computer, or you have your notebook and you make notes of the different positions that the miniatures, the characters are occupying in that notebook. And you could also handle things in different ways, because maybe you want to have this sheet with a grid or a hex grid perhaps. You could cover it with one of those plastic sheet protectors, and you could use a dry erase marker and assign a different color to each character. Maybe the fighter is red, maybe the rogue is blue, and the enemies are yellow or brown or purple, and you just write dots on different spaces. You place a dot there, and when they move, you just erase it with your finger and you place the dot anywhere else on the grid. So it's all about making the experience smooth and easy for you to run. When I make the next video where I talk about different tools that you can use in your solo RPG sessions, I'm going to recommend a software that I found very easy to use when it comes to mapping things. But there are just plenty of them. It's just going to be a minor recommendation, in my opinion. So I definitely recommend that you find the most effective and efficient programs or tools possible, so that you do not spend too much time when bookkeeping in solo RPGs, moving miniatures around, unless you enjoy it. There are many cases where I have been running role-playing games that rely a lot on that sort of war game layout, and it has been no problem at all, but it does take extra time. because like I mentioned, when you play with your group, they are also moving miniatures, they are passing around maps and charts, the dice, so you won't have to walk around, or perhaps you shift your chair a bit when the miniature was too far away, or the dice fell over there, or when you are switching maps. So it's all about that, making the experience as comfortable and as easy for you to run. Well, I hope you found these tips useful. Like I mentioned, perhaps in December, I'm going to bring out this video where I give you a lot of tools and some tips on how to use them when it comes to running solo RPGs, all sorts of emulators and tables and charts, etc. This month of November, I also wanted to run a solo session featuring a Epoch as a sci-fi horror scenario, but I don't know if I will be able to make it. Perhaps I will have to wait a month. I have some, like I told you, some reviews that suddenly got a bit cluttered on the QE list. I need to take care of those reviews first. I don't want things to stack up and suddenly you are not focusing on the purpose of the channel, because I like to talk about many things, but I want to focus on reviews as well. So well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments, questions, or solo RPG suggestions, please let us know in the comment section. And thank you so much to those of you that have been sending Drive-Thru RPG certificates to support the channel. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you. Oh, and before I forget, remember that this Friday, Black Friday and Cyber Monday, there are going to be a lot of sales and discounts at Drive-Thru RPG. So keep your eyes open. They have some really good sales around those days. Once again, thank you and see you later.